Thanks for coming on, Neil.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much, Neil.
An undercover police officer, you spent a lot of your life doing that. And to be honest with you, mate, I'm not just saying this, it's only in the last sort of 6 months, and I'm a bit ashamed of this, to be honest, where I've actually realised, bloody hell, we really depend on the services. As a normal person, I suppose when you see the odd robbery or the odd fire or the odd strain on the nurses, doctors and all these people, you don't realise sort of just how much we depend on them. But when you see really big events happen, like we have one after the other lately, you think, fucking hell, without these people, we'd be really up shit creek. So, I actually sort of a newfound appreciation for them. I don't know about you, mate.
I think I've always had an appreciation for them.
No, I didn't. I appreciated them, but what I mean is I didn't realise the seriousness of how badly we need these people.
I think maybe also, and maybe you can say the same to this, is what you realise or at least things are going well when you don't realise that's what you have.
Exactly.
So maybe things aren't going so well now that we know that we have the police and the NHS and those sort of things.
Is that sort of, I don't know, maybe it's a silly question, but I'm thinking, is it sort of a good thing for you when people sort of aren't really aware that the police are around, sort of thing, but because we're more aware of it now, do you think that that's a sign of the times?
I mean, it's a sign of events, definitely. And it's interesting you say that you become more aware of actually relying on services and police in particular. But that's because of the nature of those events, though, isn't it? And the kind of stuff that I did was a little bit sneakier than that, really. And whereas, events, as you mentioned in London, have been about things that need to be done, things that police should be doing. Police should be protecting communities and reacting and investigating crimes. Kind of stuff that I did, it's more debatable whether it's required. I mean, I have quite some strong views on that now. But police do different things, is what I'm trying to say. And
your book is called Good Cop, Bad War, and you were mainly involved in the war on drugs, is that right?
Yes, that's right. I over the space of 14 years, I worked undercover. So my brief was to go into an inner city and basically try and catch gangsters. And work from the bottom up, generally. So that was my brief.
So what? But how do you start and how do you get into that? Because that's not. Well, I guess maybe it is something in school you do think that would actually be quite a cool job.
It is quite glamorous to the mind of a young man.
Yeah, because you're putting on a moustache and you've got a wig and you're getting to dress up as whatever in your mind.
I think most of the time in life you'll find whatever you think a job is like, and I'm talking for all jobs, it's never what it's cracked up to be, and. So I know a couple of lads who are policemen who've actually told me they kind of regret getting into it now. Like the urge to help people and do good is still there, but the shit you have to go through in dealing with the backstabbing and things that goes on in places like the police force, sometimes it's more hassle than it's worth, some people say.
What was your experience in that?
How did you feel when you first walked in as a police officer, like your first early days?
Oh God, I was 19. I dropped out of university and I thought, what am I going to do?
What were you studying at uni?
Business studies.
Okay. So
really
you weren't always...
stupid idea, because I got there and found I had absolutely no interest in business whatsoever. So I quickly dropped out, and I think that what was going on in Manchester at the time was quite an influence as well, because it was just one big party. It was the birth of Acid House, and it was fabulous.
It's so ironic that obviously you got recommended to us by Sean Atwood, who was really big into that scene.
The godfather of Acid House in Manchester.
Well, no, that was the first name that came to my head when you mentioned that era.
Yeah, I mean, in Manchester then was incredible. It really was. But I didn't last for...
Like, what was your... Did you ever go to any raves or anything?
Well, yeah, I went to loads of the Acid House parties, yeah.
But as a normal person, as a policeman?
No, as a student. Yeah, I stood on a wooden box in many a warehouse, waving my arms around to 303s and squelchy.
So you weren't a do-gooder, like, as in, some people make out, like, I guess there's a bit of a stereotype about policemen that they were all bullied at school and they're all, like, basically straight, like as it gets?
No, I mean, I was a basic sort of upbringing, fairly middle class town, but not particularly well off. I grew up in Buxton, and I went to college in Manchester. But I mean, I didn't last long because I dropped out. It was boring as hell, and I realised I wanted to do something that was, different every day. So I had planned to go backpacking around Europe because at the time that's what adventurous 19-year-olds did.
Was that interrail, or was that sort of
yeah, interrailing, and then maybe fruit picking, that kind of thing. This was the idea I had.
We've all had that dream.
We've all had it. I was there.
Not me.
No.
I was there and ready to go, and then I saw an advert for the police in my local newspaper. So I thought, oh, that'll be different every day. That'll be a bit different, learn a few things.
Fruit picking in the.
It feels to me though, people, and this isn't. I kind of wished I'd done it in a way because people seem to really get a lot out of those experiences when they go backpacking, but. There's some people I do know who've gone and then gone too long, and it's almost like now they're just avoiding getting on with life and they just want to put it on hold.
Yeah, but you're saying that as a YouTuber.
But they don't, but I mean, I've been a lucky bastard because when I avoided life, it just somehow landed on my feet.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think you picked the sensible option.
Well, quite possibly. But I flipped a coin anyway because I couldn't decide.
Did you really?
Wow.
Yeah. I flipped a coin.
Heads was
the police.
Ironically, like one of the very known famous criminal used to. Two-Face.
Yeah.
A real criminal.
A fictional criminal, right, okay. I must say.
I was living that BC world, definitely. So I went into the police and I got in, but I was an incredibly naive. Well, I didn't realise at the time I was naive until I got into the police, and I was crap at it. I was genuinely rubbish. I didn't deal with the confrontation very well. I didn't get on with my colleagues very well. I was more of a sort of nerd. I used to play Dungeons and Dragons, and I was listen to acid house or progressive rock, and they all just want to talk about football. So there was a real culture clash, and I did.
Are
struggle.
they more like jocks? Would you like that sort of type?
Straight jocks.
I mean, there's a big mixture of people in the police, but there's still a huge percentage who I suppose you could describe as jocks. They want to talk about football. In fact, one person said to me, "You don't talk about football. What do you talk about?" And it was an honest question. So it was a real weird culture shock that's trying to break up a fight outside a pub, and it was just. I'm just holding onto someone's arm and being swung about. I was absolutely terrible at it. but I just about survived my probation. I was on reports for a bit, and then I moved up to the north of the county again, up to Glossop, and I did better. But then I was fortunate to get a month's attachment to the drug squad. Now, the drug squad at the time was where all the money was. They were all the detectives wanted to get into the drug squad. They had the biggest cars. They had the biggest overtime. They were flash.
Why did you get into that then? If you were considered not to be very good at policing.
Well, by that stage, I'd improved, and I'd started to become good. I started to arrest people and start to catch criminals.
In what way would you say you'd improved? Do you feel like you sort of gradually learned how to be a bit more confrontational and?
Well, it's not being confrontational; it's dealing with confrontation.
Dealing with it, rather. Sorry.
Sort of reducing it, and I was fairly good at investigating crime and catching people.
Do you think that nerdiness that you said, did that sort of pay into you, help you?
Nerdiness definitely helped. Attention to detail, and I had my eye on CID. Obviously, that was the kind of thing that suited my personality more. And I was just fortunate, I think, to have got the drug squad attachment.
Was it a bit of a cliche, really? Was it sort of you and your partner who was a kind of hard-nosed jock?
You're picturing me and you being detectives, aren't you?
So it was a bit more. You were sort of the one who was like a bit more considered, and he was a bit more like, "Let's get out of here." And you were like, "No, there's something around on the scene that we can find here." And then you find like a hair or something. Was it a bit more like that?
A little bit. If you consider me and the rest of them a general partner, because actually, as a police officer, you tend to work on your own as a constable.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, most of the time.
Because whenever I think of a policeman, I never think of a lone policeman. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, well,
quite a lonely
in
job.
Derbyshire, there's not so many numbers that you can go around in pairs most of the time.
Okay.
So yeah, I was on my own most of the time.
Okay. And when you say catching criminals, you don't mean sort of hopping fences and stuff. You mean more sort of hunting people down, or?
There was a fair bit of that. I mean, I remember that just stood outside the local nightclub in Glossop, and a guy came out, had been chucked out, and he chucked this rock through through the window. Bearing in mind, I'm quite some distance away from it at this point. I started moving towards him and I actually said, "Stop, police."
Brilliant.
And of course, they don't, do they? And I thought, I said it, and I can't believe I just said that.
Yeah.
I could have snuck up behind him, you know? It's like classic cliche. Anyway, a bit of a running after him. And
You doing this down the street, and he's like, "Oh, wait, that's not a gun, is it?" And you're like, "No, it isn't, but stop."
Anyway, I ran after him and I ended up scrapping with him for a good 5 minutes and brought him in. And the fact that I was quite scrawny and I managed to hold on to this guy, I suppose those were the kind of things that created a reputation which managed to sneak an attachment to the drug squad.
For a month.
For a month, yeah,
Okay.
which is not a long time. And the drug squad hated it. They hated having rookies.
Again, it is another cliche, though.
I know, but they did. It's just totally cliche. But they hated it because we just got underfoot. We didn't know what we were doing. They hadn't chosen to have it. It was foisted upon them from management, and they thought it was dreadful. But one of them said to me, who had a job down in Derby, one of them said, "Fancy having to go out buying some crack?" I thought,
yeah.
right, okay. So he says, "Yeah, it's 20 quid. There's a door down there. And there's this gangster called Danny Anderson. Knock on the door, ask for Danny, and see if you can come away with a crack cocaine."
So in full uniform, you walked down the street. Okay.
No. By this day, I mean, with the drug squad, you had to be sneaking around. So
I'm thinking to myself, build wise, that's like scrawny sort of like physique that you've got. You're going to be much, much more believable than some of those other guys. Is that not
that might have been the view that my colleague took.
Yeah.
But I mean, actually, that's stereotype because once you start moving amongst problematic drug users, you realise they come in all shapes and sizes.
Yeah.
So that's just part of the sort of stigma and stereotype, really.
So you walk down the street.
It's probably what he thought. Hey, look at him, he's scrawny. He'll do.
So there you go.
It might have been as simple as that. I don't know.
So you're walking down the street,
Yeah.
and you just sort of gone, "Yeah, all right, I'll give it a go."
Yeah. Now, I am quite geeky.
Okay.
So I had picked up all of the right slang and I knew the commodity to a degree. So I felt comfortable I could buy it, you know.
When you say you knew the commodity, what you mean? You just
I
sort of
knew as much as I could about it
Okay.
from an outsider's point of view.
So you knew what to ask for, sort of how to ask for those sort of things.
Yeah.
Because
So
it is a bit of a weird thing, you know. You don't really know.
we
One
had,
weed, please. You know.
We had
One
a guy
crack.
called Paul Hannaford come down here and show us how he used to put the drugs in him, and that was an eye opener. Like, because if you've never been around heroin before, you're like, what the fucking hell's all this? Do you know what I mean? So you'd have had to done your research, obviously.
Yeah. So because I was good, I was doing this attachment, so I wanted to impress and you know what I was talking about. Anyway, so I went and knocked on the door and he interrogated me a bit. Where are you from? You know, how long you been doing this? That kind of thing. And I asked him for a stone and he gave me a little stone of crack wrapped in Rizzler, and I came away like, wow, I've got it. And
You get the stone and you go. And he's going, "Who are you giving the thumbs up to?" "No one." Just
anyway, that sort of defined the next 14 years of my life. Because the thing is, you probably see this on American TV, you hear about it, this kind of work having gone on in America for a long time.
Yeah.
At that point in 93, this was really new in the UK. I mean, there was undercover work, but that was more sort of high-end, blokes wearing suits, that kind of thing. This low-level undercover work, it just wasn't happening at all in the UK. And the reason there was pressure to do it is because in the newspapers at the time, there was the major moral panic about crack and this evil drug that's coming from America. And I remember seeing Nancy Reagan on TV saying, "One smoke of crack cocaine and you're addicted for life," which is bollocks. But at the time, I believed it.
And she knew.
Oh yeah, she knew. Yeah, it was a big.
Yeah,
It was a
Ronald Reagan didn't know much either, to be fair. So what they were letting her talk for?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's much more friendly face. and so, what happened after you'd taken that crack rock? Did you took it away? Did you then just go back to the house and arrest him, or what happened?
No, well, then it started a longer operation, and so the squad decided to try and sort of do a more intricate job and catch who his runners were, and
Did you prove yourself with that then?
I did, yeah, because one thing I found quite quickly is that I can stay calm in the pressure. So if I get an adrenaline situation, I feel like I've got all the time in the world to think about it, which is, as I understand, is a reasonable advantage. It's probably why I took to it so quickly.
Great quality to have, really.
Why
so
do
you
you think you were
surprised
so
yourself.
nervous, though? Yeah, why do you think you were so lack of nerves? Because, people would think the opposite of a nerdy guy who goes into the police force. You sort of...
Well, I mean, you just have to approach it rationally, and just try and slow your thinking down and think things through rationally. But it just so happens that my response to adrenaline, because don't get me wrong, I was in full fight or flight.
Yeah.
I knew I was at risk, and the adrenaline was flowing. But that just helps me relax. So that's the way I sort of see it.
Yeah. I've been in situations which some people would say are life or death before, and once you realise, if I attack this with a rational mindset, I've got 10 times better chance of getting out of the situation alive.
Absolutely.
Than if I panic. If you panic, you're much more likely to make an absolute tits of it, and it's on that sort of decision in your head. Once you make that, you tend to approach things a lot more calmer than everyone else.
I think that's the nail on the head, to be honest. I think that's exactly it. It's just approaching it with that rationale. I think that's it.
And realising you'll survive on the other side if you do.
Or more likely to.
Yeah.
But like when I'm watching fighting, for example, when they do the ring walk, if I see someone who's really worked up and I was like put my money on the other guy straight, and it doesn't always work that way, but I think a lot of the time you'll see the calmer people are just the better decision makers every time.
I think that's a universal truth, to be honest, about being calm and thinking your way through things, definitely.
And so it took that month, and then they just kept you on for longer.
They just kept me on, yeah. And then I spent probably more time doing that kind of work for the next decade and a half than anything else.
How do you set yourself up in that world? Because actually it must be quite weird that you can't stay in the same place for quite a long time then, because once you made your arrest, people then know, well, he's the only one who's not been arrested. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I mean, the job's developed very, very quickly. And I think an important point to note is that even though he questioned me, it wasn't really that difficult.
No.
Not really. I knocked on this geezer's door and he's just never met me before, but he sells me a rack of crock.
Yeah.
Crock of rack.
Yeah.
Crock of rack?
Crack of rock.
Rock of
crack. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
one of them.
he's probably the biggest drug dealer, in the world, so he's going to want to get rid of his stuff. So that going at that level is going to make it easier to infiltrate them, is it?
Well, yeah, but they were unawares. The whole drug scene was completely unawares of this new tactic.
Brilliant.
But he went to prison, and people talk in prison.
Yeah.
And people talk with people all regionally. So it didn't take very long before everyone knew that this tactic was around. So it instantly became more difficult. So short jobs turned into several weeks, and then it wasn't long before you wouldn't do a job less than 6 months.
Wow.
So I started moving around the country, and I'd go, say, I'd be dropped into Leicester for 6 months, and the team of cops who were running the job and were providing the backup and the technical equipment and all of these kind of things, because the tactic developed very quickly tactically, and they wouldn't be allowed to know my name, where I was from. They weren't allowed to ask me where I was from or anything. So they would know my pseudonym as much as the gangsters would know my pseudonym. And then very quickly that structure came in place.
Right. And so what was your pseudonym?
I was a different one each time. Cookie was one once.
Okay.
I thought, Cookie, everyone likes cookies, don't they?
Yeah.
It sounds really friendly and unthreatening.
No,
Yeah.
I know a lad who goes by that nickname, actually.
Really? Why?
His last name's Cook, but...
Oh, okay, right. Yeah, all right.
Well, yeah,
I
I was calling myself Paul Cook as well, but Cookie, I just thought Cookie.
Yeah, it's got a good ring to it, though. It's a believable street nickname.
Yeah, because you'd never, if you'd gone in there and your name was Scarface, it would have been a bit different, wouldn't it?
Yeah, then you've got a bit to live up to instantly.
Yeah, exactly.
So we've gone from the beginnings of undercover police work in this country, which you were sort
of this type, yeah,
around for, to, all right, it's now a major operation, and you're now... me and Lawrence have seen it before in the movies where you see the guy he almost has to create a whole new life for himself. When actors sort of get inside a character, they take on all of the sort of personal traits of this character they've created in their head, and now you're living a whole different life than what you have been living. Did you ever feel like when you were doing these big operations that you were like losing Neil and becoming Cookie?
Well, I mean, when we eventually had training, because for the first few years I didn't have training, and I helped build the training. But we had some of the level 1 undercover people, the people who do the proper spy stuff, come and teach us. And they always said that we're not actors. we're playing just a different version of ourselves. So it is an interesting question, but I never found I was losing a sense of self, but I did change quite drastically because essentially you have to manipulate people, and you have to manipulate people within a community. So, I would pick the easiest people to manipulate, which is often the most problematic drug users,
the weakest,
the weakest. And the way to make use of those people is to befriend them and empathise with them. So it's like weaponising empathy. So
it's almost sociopathic in a sense.
In an organised kind of way, yeah, absolutely. Because you are manipulating someone in the most dark and cynical way, really.
For the greater good in what you
for
think
the
you're doing.
greater good. I mean, all of the time, as far as I was concerned, I knew I was putting people at risk, because obviously they'd be at risk as the person introducing me. I knew I was making their lives harder because they get wrapped up in it. They may get a prison sentence themselves. I knew this harm I was causing to these people quite early on, but I was taking the view that the end justified the means.
Yeah.
Because it's the end result of catching the really vicious gangsters who are murdering people.
That makes it all worthwhile.
Well, I was balancing that as an ethical decision, and at the time, I was thinking that the end justified the means.
So I mean, this is a sort of left field question, but your upbringing in that, were you quite an empathetic person, or were you sort of quite a hard young man when you were growing up? Were you taught to be? Because I'm thinking to myself, I've always sort of been taught from being young, like, if someone's on the street and they're like homeless or they're clearly a heavily drug user, you should sort of take pity on them. What were you sort of taught about those people before you ended up sort of trying to lock them up?
I mean, I was quite politically minded, and I used to debate politics with my parents, and they were quite ethically minded. But I don't really think actually I developed my sense of empathy very much until my early 20s, if I'm honest. As a young person, you can be very interested in the arguments, but not necessarily feeling someone else's point of view.
That's very true, and which is why most people get swept away with that sort of thing in their years.
As a 20-year-old man, I remember I was very harder than I am now. It's like my emotional side. If I see like the scenes we've seen on the TV now, when I said to you when I first seen the Twin Towers 9/11, I was like, oh, that's really sad, but it didn't really hit us. But now when I see things going on, it actually hits us because I've become aware of what suffering and pain really is to people. So do you feel like by dealing with these people emotionally, you switched on more?
Absolutely, and I completely agree with you. I would trace a similar journey as well. I've become more empathetic, but certainly, I mean, I learnt through this work really, and develop my empathy in that way. So emotionally, things touch me much more. I think I've got more emotional intelligence, and I think that's probably the phrase that fits.
Which sort of makes sense. As you get older, you do learn more. You learn about more of other people's experiences.
And another thing is, this isn't true across the board, but I do believe it's like generally, I think the older you get, the weaker you get emotionally as well. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean the more vulnerable you become a little bit, because when you're 20, you can be a bit more emotionally ignorant and be like, I've got the rest of my life. It's all going to work out good for me. Do you know what I mean? But once you realise, no, actually, like, it isn't how you all expected life to work out. I don't know. I've seen people become who I thought were really hard melt as they've gotten older, like and crumble. Who I never thought would.
My idea on that, though, is I do think that's very much a cultural thing.
Maybe.
Or maybe that's also a stage that some people go through.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that I've seen, not every man in my life, not every woman in my life has sort of gone through that same arc. And in other cultures, you'd argue it's not the opposite, but I think maybe in Western culture, people are encouraged more to hold on to things. And so you become a bit more... you romanticize things to some extent, and as you begin to empathize with other people a little bit more, things become a bit more heartbreaking for you.
It's not a general rule, but it's something I've observed where I've seen people get a bit more in touch with them.
You mean the regretful side of things?
I think once people realise they can't just continue making mistakes and everything's going to...
And harming other people. I think when you realise what harm you do to other people, I think that's quite a big change.
Oh, it was for me. I mean, that was one of the biggest changes, really.
So were you saying you went through that during your time in the police, or was that...
I went through that through undercover work. I mean, I'll give you an example. A guy I manipulated in Nottingham, a guy called Cammy, and he was a problematic heroin user. He was a drug dealer, but he was on bail for drug dealing. So he was the perfect sort of person for me to go, because he was connected to the group that I wanted to get into, which was the Bestwood cartel, run by Colin Gunn. He was connected to him. That's where his supply was coming from, and he was introducing me. So I manipulated him. I bought him presents. I remember one day I gave him a baseball cap that said it was left over from when I'd been shoplifting, and he immediately took his cap off and put this new one on, and looking at himself in the shop reflection in the shop doorway, he says, "Oh man, that's amazing. Needed a new cap." Anyway, one day I found him leaning against this same shop doorway, and he was crying. I says, "Cammy, man, what's up with you?" He says, "Oh man, my best mate from school, he's just died in a football pitch, heart attack or something." Says he's meant to be the healthy one. Surely it should have been me that happened to. And so I said, "So mate, are you going to go to the funeral?" And he looked at me like I was an alien. He says, "Don't be fucking stupid. Last thing that family wants is some dirty smackhead turning up at their son's funeral." Which really hit me, because, it's worth remembering that however much society and individuals look down on problematic drug users, it's not often as much as they look down on themselves. So that was just one of the things that really got me. This is the kind of person I'm manipulating and making life more harsh. But anyway, when he was arrested at the end of the job, a few months later, in the police cell, he was on suicide watch. And it's not because he was going to jail, which he was. It's not because he was rattling from the heroin, which he was. It's because, and he said this in the police interview, he thought I was his one friend in the world.
Fucking hell, mate.
So that
real.
That really grips you. That really does.
Nobody ever wants to make anyone feel like that. Ever. No. Even if it's part of the greater good, and you're convinced that all the work you're doing is good, that would I think if you didn't touch anyone, they'd have to be heartless, to be honest.
You can sort of play that both. I mean, obviously you empathise with that.
If you play the fucking, I wouldn't be affected like that.
No.
So if someone said that to you, you'd be fucking gutted. I know you would.
I absolutely would be gutted, but at the same time, I also think some people are emotionally manipulative people, and when someone's angry with you, they'll say, "I thought you were my only friend in the world." But the thing is, and they're trying to harm you back because they feel like you've done harm to them. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, I'm not saying it takes away from his experience.
No, but in this situation, I think that was the genuine truth. Yeah, because I know his situation, and I know he was struggling to connect with other people.
And those manipulative people that you're referencing as well, though, people who are naturally like that. And I've met people who it's almost like a way of life for them. They don't know. Let's say breathing. Like some people, there's no guilt. There's nothing behind the eyes. This is how they survive. That. I think, was it reptilian brain or something Dan Hardy said, just heartlessness, but they're like that all the time. But for you, you're not like that. You're doing this as a job. So you're living with the consequences of it. So a normal person goes to a 9-to-5 job, they might stack shelves all day, they go home, might have a bit of a bad back, but they can switch off and that's it. You have permanent guilt, clearly, from a situation like that. Did that just affect you throughout the rest of the evening, or for weeks on end? Or?
For a long time. In fact, I decided I was going to stop working undercover from the end of that job. I mean, there was all sorts of things happening in that job anyway. Just to give you an impression of what led to me thinking, I can't do this work anymore. He introduced me to a lieutenant. There was a person I really needed to get in touch with, really connected within that cartel, and got the introduction. And I met up with him, and he turned up in this car with his 12-year-old son by the side of him in the car, like a little mini me. They both had the shaved head.
Clever.
Anyway, he opened the door and immediately stuck a knife into my bollocks, and I could feel the steel actually pressing against where you really don't want to feel a knife.
Oh, fuck, aye.
So the guy, not the kid.
Drug dealer. The drug dealer, not the 12-year-old, the drug dealer.
The 12-year-old had the arse.
But his son was there. His son was there watching.
Yeah.
Anyway, he interrogated me for about 15 minutes.
With the knife against you?
With the knife against, yeah. Who was her? Who did I know? I know Cammy. How long have you known Cammy? All these kind of conversations, he's asking me again, trying to trip me up, asking me in different ways. Anyway, eventually, thought, no, I'm going to either lose my nuts here, or I'm going to get some heroin. Anyway, eventually sold to me, and that got me into that group. That was about 4.5 months into the group, into the operation. The next day, my backup team, 2 of my backup team had gone sick. So I had to have 2 new people on the team. I met them in the morning, and one of them shook his hand. Yeah, seems okay, no problem. The next one shook his hand, and instantly the hairs went up in the back of my neck. Thought, this is just not right at all. Now, when you've been working day after day, working undercover, your perceptions are quite finely tuned, or maybe you're just a bit paranoid.
You're on the edge.
You're on the edge. You're really focused. And so I said to the guy running the job, I said, boss, I cannot have this guy in the briefing. I can't explain in detail. It's just something about his body language. It's just not right. And bless him, he said, yeah, no problem at all. We'll exclude them both so they don't ask questions and not let them know where you're going. Anyway, that job came to an end. Eventually, that led on to Nottinghamshire Police bringing down the Bestwood cartel. Colin Gunn's in prison at the moment. But when Gunn was brought down, it turned out that the detective that I'd taken exception to was an employee of Colin Gunn. He'd been employed to join the police 7 years before. He was paid £2,000 a month on top of his police wages, plus bonuses for good information. And so, as I say, he'd been in 7 years.
It was the fucking Matt Damon DiCaprio fucking movie, Come to Fucking Life.
Absolutely.
So your intuition was dead on.
It probably saved my life.
Because
that happens a lot, apparently.
As soon as you shook his hand.
Yeah, when I shook his hand.
What's that movie called?
The Departed.
That's it. Sorry, I needed a note. You know, it's on the tip of your tongue.
Description.
The Departed.
All right.
Great film.
Yeah.
But all the way through that job, Colin Gunn had been telling everyone, getting it out on the streets, that if he caught an undercover cop, then they'd be tortured to death.
Fuck me.
So there was all of that sort of pressure going on all the time. So yeah, I mean,
well, you're not worried. I suppose the thing is, once they've seen your face, they know who you are, or they sort of know roughly who you are. Was that always a worry for you? Was that something you were always worried about? Like, were you worried that in the same way that criminals are worried that there's going to be a knock by the police or sort of their doors kicked in, were you worried that you might have the same wherever you stayed at night, that criminals were going to come for you and do whatever?
As each job went on, and I went from one city to another, it was always in the back of your mind, and you do start to look over your shoulder that little bit more.
Yes.
Oh yeah. I mean, that Colin Gunn guy who he hired to go into the police force, how did he get rumbled?
Well, it was because the job into Colin Gunn was so good, and a little bit of luck as well. It was a very good piece of police work by Nottinghamshire Police, and he was caught, but he was implicated in providing the information which ended up in some murders. The judge sent him to prison. His name is Charlie Fletcher. It's all a matter of record. The judge sent him to 7 years, 1 year for every year he'd been inside. But in the debrief for that, when I met some senior covert police afterwards, I was saying, what's going on? And the attitude completely to me and from the senior covert police was, what are you on about? Of course this happens. With this much money involved, how can this not happen?
So when you think about it logically, they've got millions of pounds gear worth to play for. What is it to pay this lad to go and join the police force? And obviously police force wages are nowhere near the kind of money that he's going to be able to get paid, be bribed to
it's
give
even
him.
better to be living on both.
Oh, he's going to get double bubble, mate. I mean, he's literally getting overtime. Yeah. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, it's £7 billion a year goes into organised crime in this country.
Rick Ross, who he's a rapper, but he got found out to be a prison guard, and he sort of hidden all that behind. But they said that the reason why he was a prison guard was because he was paid to become one, so he could. Yeah.
There's
conveniently he came out with that
stories about Rick Ross because his name is taken from someone else,
an actual drug dealer as well. So there's a lot of fakeness about him. But anyway,
his chicken shops are great. Anyway, and one thing that did strike me, which maybe I didn't get the chance to bring up, what was the guy's name that you were his only friend?
Cammy.
Yeah, that. I guess that's part of the issue as well, isn't it? Is the portrayal of these people is that they're terrible drug dealers or users, and then you're the good police people, and it's much blurrier than that, isn't it?
Oh, it's far, far blurrier than that. Absolutely. I mean, as I say, at the end of that job, it was just because I've been doing it for so many years at that point, and I knew very early on that the war on drugs couldn't be won, but I kept doing it to catch the bad guy at the end. But at that point, that ethical sort of balance that, you know, the end justifies the means, I heard that from Cammy and various other people I'd manipulated. I just thought, I can't do this anymore. But very quickly, after only a few weeks, I was tempted back into it. I got a phone call, and it was the guy who ran the operations at East Midlands Special Operations Unit. And they said, Woodsy, we need you to do this job, because these are the hardest to get into, and these gangsters are even nastier than the last ones. These ones are using rape as punishment.
Wow.
They are using complete blanket terror, and we've got to catch these guys. So, Woodsy, we need you to do it.
And what was it that would tempt you back into a situation where rape was the punishment for anything?
Well,
why were you drawn back to that? Do you know what I mean? You're out of it. You're sort of, I'm done.
Well, because the bad guys need catching, and if they're that vicious, we've got to do something about it.
You've clearly got a sense of you want to do good in the world, though, haven't you? Obviously,
yeah.
Because you're willing to put your own life at risk in order to long-term save others. I mean, you're not directly pushing someone out the way of a moving car, saving them that way, but ultimately you're saving a lot of lives at the end of it, is the way you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, because there was no glory in it at all. Because we weren't even allowed to tell anyone.
Yeah.
So
your family,
colleagues couldn't say, "Oh, look, he's the man who does that," because they weren't allowed to know.
You're like the Men in Black, aren't you? Like,
no rewards or anything.
How did it feel that when you find, like, so the Nottingham gang, for example, you work for months and months and months, and then you finally get your man? Sometimes in life I find that when you have to graft your arse off or something and you finally get what you've been waiting for, all the graft sort of takes shine off of it at the end. Did you ever feel like a bit of an anticlimax?
Oh God, yeah, and also you get adrenaline fatigue as well. So for a couple of weeks afterwards, it's just like getting up in the morning and you just can't. You don't ever feel awake for so long afterwards, and that got longer after every job as well. So yeah, it's exhausting.
Was it a bit? I don't know if you'd use the word depression or anything like that, but did you ever feel like really down after things like that happened?
I did, yeah, especially things like Cammy and various other things. I mean, much later on, eventually, I mean, I had lots of near-death experiences. I had blades threatened me. I mean, the Burger Bar boys stripped me at gunpoint. All of these various things happened.
Who was that?
Oh, that was Northampton. So when they phoned me up and said these guys are raping people as punishment.
Oh, that's
the Burger Bar boys.
How far into your career was this then?
This was quite late on, not the last job I did, but very near this. So this is probably 2004.
So how many years you'd been in at this point?
I'd been doing it about 12 years, something like that.
Wow.
11 or 12. I've been in the police, say, 15, 16 years, something like that.
The Burger Bar boys. That sounds so nice.
Yeah.
I love a burger.
I mean, they're quite notorious. They're from Birmingham, but they basically were moving into Northampton and taking over the heroin and cocaine supply there.
And how would someone do that? Not that I'm looking. But how would someone move into another area and take over a scene like that? Do you just go in and kill the other people, or do you go in and threaten them, or what happens?
Well, this is part of what I observed and part of what formed my later conclusions.
Right.
And because eventually I realised each year that these things were getting, and the very last job I did, I realised that there's no end to this. The drug war is an arms race with no chance of de-escalation. There's no peace treaties. So everything gets nastier. So all the time I was developing more tactics, and the police get better and better at investigating drugs crime. And there's always a pushback in tactics. I don't know if you've seen The Wire. It's accurate in the fact that there's always a pushback. There's always a countermeasure. And the most effective countermeasure that gangsters have is the increased use of fear and violence. Because the most successful gangster who is the one who can most successfully intimidate a community. So it becomes an arms race with the police, but also between the different organised crime groups or the urban street gangs who deal, the most successful ones are the scariest ones. So Birmingham gangs had obviously developed their scariness over time much more effectively, and they moved into Northampton, and they just couldn't compete with them. They just couldn't compete. They had a big gang, they were big backing behind them. You know, they were a growing monopoly, and they just intimidated everyone.
And they raped people.
Yeah, I mean, I saw the police intel at the start of the job that they were regularly raping people, and then you were using that as part of their intimidation. So
they were raping. They were raping men and women.
that was the intelligence, both. But there was one particular intel that, you know, if someone couldn't pay a drug debt, they were going to rape your sister.
Right.
And they did. That was the intelligence. Now, I went out actually on a job, and this is after I'd managed to get into them and buy off them. One day there was intel in the morning that they'd gang raped someone in the car that I'd been getting into each day. So they said, right, we're going to have some contingency plans. The female who's been raped is not likely to report it. But if they do, we need to be ready with the evidence. So if you get in that car, then you're potentially going to be part of the crime scene. Right. So when you come out, we're going to have to seize your clothes. And so it was all like arranging new clothes, arranging the backup. But of course, when I put the call in to buy some brown and white off them in the morning, they turned up as a different car, and the car that they'd done the rape in was burnt out on the edge of the city. So you know, they covered the tracks pretty well.
They knew what they were doing as well.
Oh God, yeah, they really knew what they were doing. They were vicious. They were genuinely vicious people.
And where were they? They were just normal guys from Birmingham, normal gangsters. What, like? I
mean, they were second generation gangsters. They'd grown up, and they're from, you know, their father figures. They were all gangsters.
It's funny that you said that kid was in the car with his dad. Just vision of Lock, Stock, you know, when Vinnie Jones is driving around with his son and that, and it's like, it's not uncommon, is it?
Exactly. I mean, the longer this goes on, the more that's going to influence the young. And you know, this arms race means that the successful people are the most violent. I mean, I met this kid in, just one example of many, in Leicester, just a few years before. And he'd just been selling cannabis on a mountain bike, like loads of teenagers do. Bit of a cheeky kid, actually quite likeable. But he got recruited into the heroin and crack scene, where you really have to be violent or prepared to be violent to survive, because otherwise someone thinks you're a soft touch and might grass you up. Mm-hmm. So you're safer if you're more violent. Mm-hmm. So I saw him go from a cheeky, sort of pretty likeable 17-year-old to an absolutely terrifying 18-year-old who was instantly, because he was learning how to behave. So the drug trade, the illicit drug trade, is shaping the personality of so many of our young men in inner cities, which is changing the shape of communities.
It's taken people who, if there was opportunities, more jobs available and things like that, who maybe they'd be answering the phone for a living, being polite to everyone or whatever, if it was worth their while to do that, they're now picking up a knife, basically.
Let's also be quite honest, there are also people who are people who could be entrepreneurs, or people who could be, you know, starting their own businesses and those sort of things, because they're ruthless in a different way.
What we're saying is they're not bad eggs. Like, no. Obviously there are bad eggs out there, but we're saying there are people who are potentially middle of the road guys who could go one way or the other.
Carphone warehouse,
but because opportunity-wise, it makes more business sense to them in their 18-year-old mind to be a gangster. They're going that way.
It's also that I was watching American Gangster the other day, the movie with Denzel Washington, which is it's such a great portrayal of a gangster, because there's so many different sides to it. And in that film, there's a great scene where T.I., I can't remember what his character is, but he's the baseball kid who originally wants to be a baseball player, but he says, I don't want to be a baseball player anymore. I want to be like you. And he's really angry with him, because he's like, no, you're meant to be a baseball player. He's like, yeah, but you've got this life. And you do imagine that must be quite alluring for a lot of people who see their older brother or whatever getting in a really expensive car and being like, great, well, you know, I'm going to go and sell a load of drugs. Or, you know, I've got a BMW. Why wouldn't you want that, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, it's a great misunderstanding about crime that it's caused by criminals. It's not. It's caused by opportunity. Mm-hmm. So if that 17-year-old that I was talking about, there was no way at the age of 17 he ever would have been that violent without going into that world. Mm-hmm. But that was simply the biggest opportunity for him. And the drugs market is a massive opportunity, because there's actually a very low risk of being caught. Very, very low risk.
Why so low? Just because
the market's massive.
It's a needle in a haystack situation.
It's a needle in a haystack. It's so huge.
And that's the funny thing.
Our prisons may be half full of people connected with the drug trade. It might be the thing that's filling the prisons up, but that's still a drop in the ocean.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, everyone knows someone who can get them drugs, and that's not a coincidence. Do you know what I mean? But to me, I mean, I remember being a young lad, and I remember like lads I knew who I was mates with getting arrested and things like that. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I understood the way they looked at it, because a lot of them, it wasn't the way people are made out on the news of, oh, people are just bad eggs and things like that. It's like, no, it's like, if my choice is stacking shelves at Tesco or the Co-op or dealing drugs for a lot more money, a lot of them, and I'm not saying that this is the right decision, but I understand the logic behind it, are going to think, I'll take the fucking risk. I'd rather be able to pay rent in a nicer place and have a nicer car, and it is a little bit glamorous in the head as well. Do you know what I'm saying?
And this is maybe a point that we'll get onto later as well, but it's really also that some people can morally justify doing the drug side of things, because actually they think, well, I think the government's wrong on this. Drugs should be legal. I should be able to trade whatever I want. I should be able to sell cannabis to my friends if I want to.
Desperation also does wonders for your
morals.
Yeah, your guilty conscience as well, because if you're, I don't know, if you've got a son to provide for, baby to provide for, whatever, and you're thinking to yourself, you know, I'd rather give them the best in life, and if that means I've got to do this bad thing. I'm not saying every drug dealer looks at it this way. Some of them are just trying to make as much as they can for themselves, but people don't really think into the reasons that go into it in people's head.
One thing that strikes me about your story is it does seem incredibly lonely, and like you're on your own quite a lot within that. Not only professionally, because those people can't call you by your real name. You're not, if you're working with rape gangs, the last thing you want to do is be going out with a girl that then they can then use as leverage or whatever.
Fucking hell.
It does seem like quite a lonely job.
Yeah, it was. I mean, thankfully I'm quite an introvert, but yeah.
Thankfully.
Yeah.
I love that. I'm a bit like that myself.
I think the weird thing is, actually, I think for a very long time, extroverts were what everyone was encouraged to be, and now I think there's a lot more diversity in the way that people see it, because actually they see the bonuses of being an introvert as well.
Yeah, I mean, it was lonely sometimes, but then, I mean, I was actually, I didn't have the happiest home life, to be honest, and sometimes I was actually quite happy to go to work and buy drugs off drug dealers. But so yeah, it was a few years. I suppose it was a bit lonely, but I have to say though, I did so much of the work I did still enjoy. There was that trauma to it, but I enjoyed the art of deceiving people. I have to admit it. It was a
thrilling?
feeling. It was thrilling. It was a feeling of developing skills all the time, all the time learning. You'd learn from people every day, and that's a great feeling.
Did it get you, that challenge?
Oh, absolutely, the challenge, and there's always a new problem to get round, and that's thrilling.
In a weird way, I kind of look at what you did when you talk about dealing with some of the serious criminals. It's almost like being a fucking lion tamer. Like, some of these people, like, they get a buzz off of that. I mean, and we watched a film lately about a guy with bears on the second channel. And danger does bring a bit of a buzz for people, and obviously that got you at some point.
It did, yeah. I mean, even when I got introduced to the Burger Boys, which is fairly terrifying, I had to manipulate someone, because they knew the score, they knew the tactics. I had to manipulate someone in Northampton I spent weeks and weeks wooing this couple, giving them presents, like shoplifting presents. I used to love
caps.
Yeah, I used to love shoplifting, by the way. That was great fun as well for the cover.
It's really funny. A lot of our guests really been compelled by shoplifting in their life. Like, it seems to be a real thrill.
So I assumed that you were provided with the gear and then handed it over as if I shoplifted this. No, you actually shoplifted.
Sometimes I was provided with a gear, but sometimes you just have to do it for your cover. But it's great fun.
And as a policeman, you can sort of get away with it.
Well, yeah, because I knew I was giving the stuff back. Or rather, someone in the team was giving the stuff back months later. I wouldn't have to actually explain, sorry, I emptied your shelves.
And so you're giving them presents. What kind of things are you shoplifting for them? And are you shoplifting in front of them? Are they sort of going, get me that? And you're sort of like, all right, then,
yeah, sort of. But like child's clothes, I was giving them, because they had a market for baby clothes. There's always a good market for shoplifted baby clothes.
Small as well, so you can hide them in the jacket.
Yeah, but it's expensive, isn't it? You have to keep replacing them, so people, parents, not very well off. Anyway, so I wooed them for weeks and weeks before they got me an introduction. Now, on the way to meet the Burgers, where they were holding court in this snooker club in the centre of Northampton.
I love you. He's painting a picture here. I'm right into it.
And is it the way you'd imagine this, a snooker club, sort of dark lights?
Yeah, absolutely. Dark, like really big, loads of, smoky, loads of the snooker tables. And as we were approaching it, my mate, who was actually walking with a walking stick, he had a sort of gammy leg. He's walking, he's starting to sweat. He's saying no, and he was testing me the cover story he'd given me. Because basically he said, we've known each other for years, this is where we met, this is what we've done together, we almost got caught shoplifting doing this, we know this person and this person. He was grilling me with the legend he'd given me. I thought, this is so weird.
As if
because I've got a cover story, and he's making me rehearse a cover story whilst I'm running this cover story. I was like, oh my God.
Fucking hell, man.
So anyway, we got there and he's terrified I'm going to slip up. So we go in there, and instantly we get directed into the gents' toilets in the snooker club. It's quite big. And he's crapping himself. Anyway, this hooded figure comes in.
He's in the right place.
Yeah. He comes in, this hooded figure, and he goes into the cubicle and he stands in the toilet and he looks over the top and he says, what's this? Anyway, then these 4 figures come in, the door bursts open, and these hooded figures are walking round me in a circle. And every so often one of them headbutts me and gives me a dig in the ribs or kicks my ankle. And I'm just having to sort of stay there, and the keys keep circling me. And all the time, he's asking me questions and asking him questions.
Right.
And then checking him up with me again. And this goes on. And then my ear gets head-butted. And that hurts, The side of your ear, it really hurts. Yeah. And the sense of imminent violence was incredible. I just thought it was going to erupt. I thought that was it. They were all just going to instantly turn on me. And then he just goes like that. And the 4 go. And he says, yeah, all right, then what do you want? So I said, I'll have 1-on-1, please. So I got point 4 of heroin, 0.4 of crack, and then gave him the 40 quid and we were away. But
and those are the guys running the gang?
Those were the... Yeah, those are the gang.
Or are they the lieutenant? Are they sort of the ones below the very top?
Well, the guy in the toilet stood in the toilet. That was the lieutenant, and the rest of them were sort of his team.
But you never really got to meet. I suppose you're never really going to get to meet the very top people. The guys who are creaming off the millions, essentially, the hundreds of thousands at least.
No. All of the work I did was the down and dirty, grimy stuff on the streets. To be honest,
did that feel a little bit like you were winning a battle, but you were losing a war?
Well, I don't know, because sometimes there was intelligence that we'd get, that would provide intelligence to the higher up people.
Right.
But, by the end of it, you realise that actually the ones who can afford the proper corruption, the ones who can afford to pay the top dollar, they don't get caught.
Do you think they also pay
their MPs,
the police, at certain levels, possibly?
Difficult for you to say.
Well, I'll give you an example of the extent of police corruption as a result of drugs money.
Yeah, we've had a few questions about that for you.
In Manchester, when I'd finished undercover work and I was working as a conventional detective, a detective sergeant, things, it's only March 2011. And I got a call that one of the houses in Hayfield, which is in the Peak District, had been raided by a beautiful place, beautiful. This house, a sort of $1.5 million property in Hayfield, had been raided by Greater Manchester Police. And I went there because I was the duty DS. I thought, this is a bit odd. Why don't you phone ahead, get some of the locals to help you out? And they'd found this cannabis factory in the cellar of this property. And so I found the sergeant. There was loads of them as well. I think there was 12 cops there. It's like incredible. Says, why don't you just phone ahead and, we're going to be taking this crime off you anyway. It's on our patch. Why the cloak and dagger? And says, no, it's our brief. We don't talk to anyone at all. We've been tasked with bringing down the empire of Aaron Coughlin. Now, Aaron Coughlin, you can look him up as well. He is allegedly, or as this police officer told me at the time, a gangster on the south of Manchester. That's his reputation in Manchester. And he said, that's what we've been tasked to do, to bring down his empire. So we're doing warrants and doing bits and bobs where we can. But we've been told not to talk to anyone, not a single other cop. And we've been handpicked by the Chief Constable of Manchester. And there's only one Chief Constable. And so he runs, several thousand cops in Manchester. We've been picked by the Chief himself as people who are most trustworthy. And we're not to tell any of our colleagues what we do. And we only report to the Chief Constable. So I said to him, wow, so you are the untouchables then? And he says, yeah, but we've been told we're not allowed to call ourselves that. Now, it's hard to convey just how extreme a thing that is.
He seems a very straightforward guy, this guy. We've been told, but we're not supposed to. In fact, I'm telling you right now, I've been told not to tell you.
Listen, I feel stupid.
but you think about it, it's hard to grasp the importance of this, the actual impact of this.
Yeah.
The Chief Constable of Manchester can only trust those 12 in the whole of his constabulary because there was an anti-corruption thing. Because of just how much and whenever...
How easy it is to buy people off.
It is. I mean, don't get me wrong, I've worked a lot with Greater Manchester Police. There's some fantastic people there. It doesn't take many people to create a reputation of being corrupt.
People are just people, aren't they?
But if you
police officers aren't robots.
But
apart from RoboCop. He is actually half robot.
Yeah. So. Well, again, another film where you took it as a documentary. Yeah.
So you said at one point earlier on that you got in a situation when you met these burger lads that they like stripped you or something, or?
Well, yeah, I mean, I used to sometimes wear a wire, but you'd make a very careful decision whether you're going to wear any technical equipment because you are liable to get searched. And I did get searched a few times, but I thought, and it was really fortunate. I decided not to wear one on this particular occasion because they just turned on me, and there was 4 of them. And they turned on me this day, and I've been dealing with them for weeks. And they took me to the edge of the racecourse, which is a big park. Obviously, it used to be a race course in Northampton. And they said, right, lifted the shirt up. One of them had a gun in the band of the trousers. It was a self-loading pistol, handgun. I said, right, strip. You're wearing a wire, man. If you are, you're a dead man. So I stripped. No, keep going. They made me strip naked, including my socks and shoes, and I'd be stood there. And they're saying, look at that little white boy. And I thought, it's fucking cold, you bastards.
To be fair, what also must have been going through your head at this point as well is a sense of relief that you weren't wearing a wire.
Oh, you kind of have no idea just how much relief that was.
When they get stripped, you're like, fine.
Silly, what about me, dick, mate? I've got new wire items, I tell you.
Exactly, yeah. I was stripping with confidence.
He was like the full monkey.
Faster, socks as well. All right, fair enough. Yeah, there's no wire down here, mate.
Yeah.
And so you.
Fucking hell, man.
And what were they? Were they? If they're calling you a white boy, what are they?
Well, the Burger Bob boys happen to be black.
Right. Okay. Just checking. Yeah. And so stop trying to touch his legs.
I've got really long legs, so I put my feet out, and then we've had a lot of complaints about the table. Sorry about that.
Yeah. And so they make you strip in the middle of the park, at the edge of a park, but essentially in the middle of a public area.
In daylight. Yeah. Just after lunchtime.
Right.
And kids were out playing. He's getting locked up afterwards.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah. Not for the drugs. And then you are left in the middle of public with no clothes, or?
No, I put them back on pretty sharpish, and thankfully they sold to me still. I think they sold me 4.4s actually.
Right.
So you really had their trust by that point then? Yeah,
that was really well. They never obviously they trusted me more after that.
Big time.
In fact, after that, I think the next time I saw them was interesting because I was weirdly for that job I used the name Woody as a pseudonym, which I think I was being ironic because it's actually it's actually my name. But it worked. But the next time I saw them, I got in the car and it was this really, really big black car. Got in the back and they were normally completely straight. They didn't tend to use any drugs. But this day they opened the door and this big fug of cannabis smoke came out. And I got in there and the main man was sat there and he's like really stoned, his eyes. And he says, Woody man, why they call you Woody man? Is it because you looks like Woody Allen, man? Thinking, Woody Allen, I look like... I'm thinking, do I really?
Do we all look alike to you?
So anyway... the weirdest story... The weirdest... Just, thinking on your feet type of thing. I said, well, actually, it's a nickname that came from a few years ago. I said, have you seen the film Toy Story?
Yeah.
And he goes, oh, yeah. Thinking, it's a Toy Story, right? Big bad gangster.
Everyone's relaxing at this point. He's got his DVD player in the back.
I says, well, there's a bit in that when the character Woody, he's picked up by the naughty kid, and he gets a magnifying glass and burns a hole in his head.
Yeah.
Says, yeah. So at the time that film came out, I actually had skin cancer on my head. And I had to have laser surgery and it was burnt out. Can you see the scar?
Yeah.
And he went, oh, yeah. And I said, so my mates started calling me Woody.
Brilliant.
And he went, oh, man, that's so tight. So, you know.
Because he's off his tits at that point, so that's the deepest shit he's ever heard.
But he's been in prison ever since going, so I met this guy with skin cancer on his head. Right? Yeah.
But I just thought it was quite weird that, you know, this guy who was all violence and guns and rapes and things would think it was a really cruel thing to do.
Yeah.
It's amazing how people who are like really dark, evil people have this side of them. That's we're talking a lot about TV and movies. For me, when you say the word gangster, Tony Soprano was the first thing I think of, and he was someone who had he had two different sides to him in The Sopranos, where he was like the family man who had a real soft spot for animals. Anything happened to animals and it would send him off the deep end, like you'd get really upset about it, but then he'd think nothing of putting a bullet in someone's head once he went out the door and was Tony Soprano, like the gangster.
Which is sort of the funny thing, because it's the same in, again, American Gangster, which I was watching the other day. They were talking about how, you know, the Italians in America, they have a way of doing things in order and those sort of things. And the black guys who are the gangsters were seen as the disorderly guys. And what you also realise is both of those are obviously they're fiction, you know, it's not true, and it's all based on that. It sort of helps the police in a way to dehumanise both sets of those people.
Yeah.
And you do sort of realise that that's the basis of those things, that actually the reason Italian gangsters portray themselves with some set of morals is because it allows them to perpetuate that myth and get further up. And it really helps.
And manipulate a community as well.
Exactly,
because what happens, the longer that you police drugs, the more you separate police from community.
Yeah.
And so the communities that are dominated by organised crime, they enjoy taking on the community figure.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's an infamous gangster in Salford, Sean Massey, and he's shot now. He was just part of an ongoing war that's still going on in Greater Manchester. But he stood for mayor of Salford. Wow. He didn't come last. He came fourth, but he got a massive share of the vote because he'd become such a public figure. Everyone knows in Salford that he's a gangster. Everyone knows that he's got a whole team of thugs beating people up for drug debts that are, you know, that shooting people, carrying weapons. Everyone knows
that's
that.
Why. Well,
he's still a community figure.
When you go further back, like for example, The Godfather, the first one, and that was obviously written about, like, drawn from inspiration from real people. The Godfather was called The Godfather because he was seen as like
a godfather for the community.
A godfather figure of the community. So, like, when the police didn't handle, like, the first scene in The Godfather is he's going to the Godfather because the police haven't given him justice, and he wants him to sort out the people who hurt his daughter or something like that. And a lot of them still try and, because if you win people's hearts, like you're saying, the people equally. People will be terrified of you. You've got a longer chance of staying in power. But also, if people think of you in an endearing way like that,
if you kill someone for someone or you've done something terrible,
well, no, but you last longer as well, isn't it?
Yeah,
exactly. It's playing both sides of that game, isn't it?
Some people do see, and you know, not to sort of take it too meta, but some people do see the government as just sort of a legalised version of that in a way. You know, some people don't. You know, they see paying taxes as sort of a racket and those sort of things, which isn't necessarily true. You know, on a scale.
Well, a lot of the things that are done, and this is a massive conversation that we're not going to go into because we've got other things to ask about. But yeah, I think there's a lot of good people who get involved, like yourself, who get involved with the right idea, and then realise there's corruption in everywhere. Everywhere there's people, there's money, and everywhere there's money, there's corruption.
Which is what makes. Have you seen the film Hot Fuzz?
Yes.
Yeah, which is actually what makes that film so great, is because that's actually it's about. No, I'm not.
We've gone from The Godfather to Hot Fuzz.
Yeah, but Hot Fuzz. First of all, Hot Fuzz is a really great comedy in the first place. It's really funny, but it's also about how policing is the sort of the whole basis for the film is that this straight-laced cop goes into a town and wants to lay down the law. But these guys have got their own law, and it's their own racket, and they're gangsters in their own right. And it sort of shows that anyone can kind of fall into that. It's not just, you know, the sets of people we'd normally associate with that. And they all argue it's for the greater good, in the same way as an Italian family would, or, you know, anyone in that sort of area. So you must have come into contact then with a lot of different cultures as well, and sort of had to deal with a lot of those different things. With every time that you, like, did you have to research that, or was that something you had to learn as you went along? Because not every gangster's going to act the same, are they?
No, I mean, well, you can research to a degree, but on sort of street level slang and colloquialisms and things, they're so varied and they're so changeable. You just have to have an ear and adapt very quickly. To be honest, you can be calling. I mean, there was a time for a short time in Nottingham where crack was whiskey.
Right.
He used the whiskey because white whiskey.
Right.
And brown was brandy. All these kind of slang things. I don't know if that's what you mean, but the sort of slang in the language is really, really changeable.
But you can get found out if you don't know that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can stand out a great deal. You just have to sort of adapt.
What do you think makes a good undercover police officer?
Being humble, empathetic, because you can't have any kind of aggression, and you can't be someone who reacts to a situation with aggression. So the ability to be non-confrontational. Mind you, having said that,
sorry,
and being able to think on your feet. Those are the essential qualities. But you can't be someone who has any kind of confrontational bone in your body, really, because when I have been confrontational, it's been not an angry reaction. It's been a decision to do so in order to protect myself, if that makes sense.
It's very calculated what you're doing. You're not lashing out. You're doing it because you know it's in your best interest in that situation. If you stand up for yourself, for example.
Yeah, exactly.
But it seems to me, looking at you, that the fact that you don't come across as the most physically imposing guy, and that you are sort of very non-confrontational naturally, that it would have benefited you a lot in your line of work.
Yeah, I would say that's the case. Yeah, being non-confrontational is a good thing.
Mm. Going back to that guy who was the almost double agent for both sides, I was just sort of mulling over him. Mm. When he's found out and people work out he's working for both sides, there must be an incredible feeling of betrayal in the police there as well. And also, I guess, a suspicion that he wasn't the only one who knew that he was doing that. Is there also an air of suspicion between everyone that works on the staff? Do you ever feel like you couldn't really trust anyone, even within the police force? Because you find out that guy's doing that. Surely that undermines so much of what you're working on and what you believe in.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when he was found out, it was incredibly unsettling for me. I genuinely thought there was very few people I could actually trust. It made just working life much less comfortable when you come face to face with that, really.
But and also within the police force as a whole, it must make you wonder, well, who else was in on that? Because someone must have known along the way.
Yeah, I mean, you think so, but the thing is, what's unsettling is that there's no way he's the only one.
Yeah,
that's the way the tactics in corruption is going, and that's only going to get worse. Because the value in the drugs market it keeps increasing. £7 billion a year, that buys a lot of police officers, it buys a lot of prison guards. And the only way we can fight this corruption is by getting rid of the illicit drugs market and regulating drugs. It's the only way.
That's what struck me when I've watched a couple of your interviews before today, is how you kind of described it in a roundabout way as, emptying the sea with a bucket. Like, we're really just pissing it into the wind here. We need to do this differently, and you sort of got a totally different attitude to what you had when you first came in, of let's get the bad guys, to now
who is the bad guy?
Well, not necessarily who's the bad guy, but shouldn't. I think in one interview you said we want our police officers catching real criminals, and rather than the vulnerable people who are self-medicating a lot of the time. Yeah,
precisely. Because we've talked a lot about catching gangsters. I caught Colin Gunn and the Burger Bar Boys, but actually, I put a lot more people in prison that were vulnerable and just needed help. There's so many of the problematic heroin users that I met, a large number of them were self-medicating for childhood trauma. Very often for childhood abuse, either sexual or physical. I mean, there's a woman I met in Northampton, and she said to me, I can do my rattle, I can come off heroin, no problem. And I do sometimes. But the only trouble is when I do, I become suicidal, because then I start remembering the childhood abuse that I got, the sexual abuse from my uncle. And then I start becoming suicidal. So for her, it was a pragmatic decision that going onto heroin was keeping her alive, because heroin's a very powerful painkiller of the body. It's also a very powerful painkiller of the mind.
And another thing that I noticed with Paul Hannaford, in a weird way, was it seemed to motivate him in terms of giving him purpose, so that every morning when he got up, his job and mission in life was to find a way to steal enough crap to get as much money in order to afford his heroin. And I think for some people who are just sort of empty, and I'm not saying Paul was, but some people are, they need a purpose, and in a weird way they find that through the drug.
Yeah, it means they don't have to stare into that void that they have. It means they don't have to face up to that lack of connection they've got.
It's amazing how much in life bad childhood experiences echo throughout the rest of people's lives. There's some people who are 60 years old and still not over what happened when they were 10 years old.
And yet what maybe is unusual is the way that we then treat those people. Because... a lot of the time that you hear, especially in the UK, I'd imagine a lot of that is influenced, like you say, we're talking about the war on drugs. That's actually an American term, which has come over to the UK.
Yeah.
Crack was an American drug, which has come over to the UK. A lot of this seems to be influenced by American culture in some way. And the way that American culture's gone, and arguably now because we share a lot of our press barons, there's been a similar portrayal in the UK, and Sky News is going in a similar way to the way that Fox News is going. So it's sort of beginning to portray people, or the poor, or the underprivileged, or whatever you want to call them, as not people who have not had a fair start or have not had a fair chance, a crack of the whip, as people who haven't tried hard enough, and they've gone down the route because it's the easy route to go down. And so it portrays them as the people who are perpetuating their own
Absolutely,
problems.
yeah, absolutely. Let's make it clear: the war on drugs is a war on poor people, and it's a war on minorities. I mean, the racism in the war on drugs is just incredible. A black person in the UK, if they're stood in the dock, they're going to be sentenced for a drug offence. They are 13 times more likely to be sent to prison than a white person. Now that's just beyond unacceptable.
I just can't understand the logic behind it. Like, for me, why not help people? I don't know.
There isn't that much logic to the war on drugs, really. But if you imagine these police are given these powers in the beginning of the 70s and said, right, we'd be told we need to catch drug offenders.
And are they given statistics that they need to catch a certain amount of drugs?
No, but for the very first time, professional drug squads are set up. For the very first time. So they've got, right, this is our job. We've got to catch drug dealers. Hang on, what do drug dealers look like? And so that draws on prejudice.
Yeah.
If you ask every one of those people to say, "Are you racist?" Don't be stupid. Don't insult me.
Yeah.
But once you start thinking, "Oh, hang on, what does a drug dealer look like?" Then that amplifies racism that's there. So if you think what happened through the 70s, the stop search increasing, and then you've got, for example, the Brixton riots, which is basically, I think most historical commentators would say was very much down to the stop and search policy and the Metropolitan Police.
Yeah.
That's not an accident that it's 10 years after the Misuse of Drugs Act. That's the racism that is being fuelled in our societies by policing drugs.
Have you experienced in private conversation racism within the police?
Very rarely. There was one ex-South African who was in the police, who I was shocked, stunned to hear say that he trained his dog, because he was a dog handler, trained his dog to bite black people, which astonished me. I was a naive 19-year-old. But generally,
from South Africa in that time,
in that accent as well, it's like, oh my God, how sinister is that? But no, I didn't. I haven't come across. I've come across hardly any at all overt racism. But that doesn't. But it is endemic, and. The proof is the statistics. The proof that, you can't argue with those statistics that the racism is so heavy.
One of my mates who joined the police, he said that he asked the police officer, just as he was joining, he said, what do you think makes a good police officer? And the police officer, this lad I've known since I was 3 years old, so it's like, he's not going to lie to us about this, do you know what I mean? And he said, oh, it helps if you this, and then at the end he went, and you know what else he said? Now what he went, and it helps if you can beat up a black lad, basically. Yeah. And I was like,
wow.
Well, he didn't say lad though, he said something else, you know what I mean? But I'm not even going to say that, but I just remember being like, fucking hell. Like, just shocked, to be honest. I suppose I am actually naive about it, like racism, because I've never encountered it being a white lad, like from Newcastle. There's not that many like black Asian people up there. It's quite, compared to London, it's so different. So coming down to London's really opened my eyes.
I mean, policy was racist as well. In the beginning of the 90s, there are no more black drug dealers than white drug dealers. There's the criminality across is racially equal.
Is it proportionate?
It's proportionate. Yeah. It's proportionate.
It's also partly down to then the fact that if you assume that, if you assume that black people, let's just do black and white people for now, right? Yeah. If you assume that black people are carrying drugs and therefore you search more black people, the likelihood of you finding drugs on those black drug dealers is much higher. Whereas actually there's a load of white people holding drugs, but you're just not searching them.
Absolutely. And at the beginning of the 90s, the reason that I was asked if I wanted to go and buy that crack cocaine is because in the media there was the moral panic, and the moral panic was about black people dealing crack.
Yeah.
Quite clearly, all the tabloids, that's what they were talking about. So the pressure from government to police forces was catch those crack dealing gangs. So the energy was directed towards black people.
Yeah.
So how do you think that we solve this issue in reality? Would you do things differently?
The only way we can stop the accelerating racism from the drug war, the only way that we can remove the corruption that it's causing with the police and prison service, the only way that we can save more lives and reduce harm is to regulate the drug supply. You've got to take the whole market away from organised crime completely.
So
How do you do that?
Well, you break it down into individual policy chunks. So, for example, heroin is actually the easiest one. You prescribe heroin.
Right.
They do it in Switzerland. When they started prescribing heroin in Switzerland,
there was something weird about that country.
They reduced crime massively. Burglaries reduced, and they virtually eliminated street prostitution as a result of doing it, because they've rescued people who are being sexually exploited.
And do they have an NHS there, or is that part of a private system? Like, were they giving, or were they selling?
They're giving.
Right.
That's they're not paying for it. They're giving it to them. And they're looking after people, those traumatised people who need help. And so they are reducing the number of people using it very successfully. No one has ever overdosed in one of their facilities. Right. No one. In fact, no one's died in a drug consumption room anywhere in the world.
And you'd argue even if someone had, it's still less than if they were in a
exactly. So they're looking after people, and it's
because you can regulate it more.
Because you can regulate it.
It's not like, for example, when Paul was on the show, he said he was sticking a needle in himself 50 times a day or something like that. Whereas if the government are fully in control and supply, and that they can keep him at X amount. I mean, well, actually, in theory.
It's quite interesting because a lot of people criticise that system, saying you can't prescribe heroin to heroin addicts because they just want more and more. Well, actually, they let them have as much as they want. So they said so when they go onto it, and almost every one of them will say, well, great, I'll fill my boots. Tomorrow I'll have even more and more. And they keep increasing the tolerance over the space of about 6 weeks. And in virtually every case, after 6 weeks to 8 weeks, because they've got space in their life for other things and they've got other therapy going on, they start to bring their own amount down.
And because of that, they're not shoplifting, they're not robbing people and things like that.
And they're not creating...
They're not involved with gangsters either.
The gangsters disappear because their trade's disappearing. But on the other end of the spectrum, you've got cannabis. And that could be done quite easily as well, I think. Canada are about to regulate the cannabis market for across the whole country. But the reason we urgently need to regulate cannabis is because less than 1% of teenagers can buy alcohol. You know, you go into a pub, you've got this big badge that says ask 25. It's really difficult nowadays. Dealers don't ask for ID. They only want to see a £10 note. Over 50% of our teenagers in this country have got easy access to cannabis. And that's not right. The drug can be harmful for teenagers. We shouldn't be letting them get it. But perhaps even more important than that is the whole structure of organised crime, the drug dealing organised crime, recruit through the teenage cannabis market.
Right.
That's where teenagers get laid on a weight. They get laid on half an ounce. You know, come back when you've sold those 14 1-gram deals. You know, pay me then. They're involved in the market. And then they're corrupted into more and more dangerous stuff. That's where it comes from. So you can separate or you can protect our teenagers from organised crime and the drugs if you regulate them. And I would start with cannabis.
So what do you do? Because I think then we get into the details of that, because it's very clear what your idea is: legalize drugs and you can regulate it, and that's the basis. What do you do with now the sort of the chemical drugs, the drugs
like ecstasy and things like that?
Yeah, what do you do with that?
When you look at MDMA, there's a good friend of mine and fantastic campaigner called Anne-Marie Coburn. She lost her 15-year-old daughter to an MDMA overdose. Now, her daughter Martha swallowed several doses by mistake, because she didn't intend to die, of 91% pure MDMA. Now, if the MDMA market had been regulated, if you could buy it at a pharmacy when you show that you're over 18 with your photo ID, she wouldn't have been able to get hold of it, because that would have got rid of the black market.
Right.
But if she had got hold of it, even despite the regulation,
she would have had the education to know how much to take.
She would have known how much, and each individual dose would have been regulated. There would have been warnings on the packet. Exactly how much to take is quite clearly defined. Martha wouldn't have died, and virtually all of the MDMA deaths wouldn't happen if it was regulated.
Then my question to you, because you're sort of talking about like forgive the ignorance, like an FDA kind of model where it's like it's approved by those people.
Yeah,
I don't know.
It's a good model.
Is that in Britain as well, or is that just that's an American thing, isn't it? It's kind of
we have similar regulations where
exactly.
you have to be very careful what you put in food. We do it. We're very good at regulation in this country, actually.
And so then when you get into that, then there's still the fact that most people would say, well, the horse has bolted now. It's gone. The horse is halfway down the field, and we're saying, let's go catch that horse. Because new drugs are being come up with, people are trying to cook up new stuff all the time. There was the whole fad of legal highs for a while, which caused a lot of issues. Allegedly, I don't know. I mean, I never tried it. I didn't know that many people who did. What do you do about it? Because also, I mean, ketamine. Ketamine is a horse tranquilizer. How do you regulate all these things that people want to get high on, and how do you do that?
Well, whatever the drug is, it's safer if it's regulated.
Right.
So if someone's going to do it, we should try and keep them alive and reduce the harm. Drug policy should be about saving lives. But if you talk about the other novel drugs that come along, all of the legal highs as they were, NPSs, they only exist because of drug prohibition. They're a product of drug prohibition. If cannabis had been regulated 15 years ago, you wouldn't have had all the chemicals like spice, black magic.
Exactly.
You just wouldn't have. You wouldn't have had it. And it's not too late, because if you look at tobacco as an example, we now have the lowest tobacco use rate in this country since 1940. That's only possible because that chemical is regulated. You can put plain packaging.
Education has played a big part in that as well, hasn't it?
But you can't educate until you regulate, because otherwise what are you educated about?
It's also, to be fair, that took, I mean, I don't know how long that is since 1940. That's 80 years almost, right? That's a few generations that's taken time to come through, isn't it?
But it hasn't taken 80 years to get there, because the education on, so when they started putting black lungs on packets of tabs, that only started about 20 years ago. So it's not taken long to sort this out, really.
No, but at the same time, I mean, I'm not putting an argument against you. What I'm saying is we've seen how long it took. That was a few generations of watching people die of lung cancer, watching people die from, even people who didn't smoke but grew up in a smoking family, dying of lung cancer or whatever you want to call it, whatever smoking causes. And that's part of it now, is that actually a lot of people are very scared of these drugs, and we're almost being scared into regulating these things in a way.
Well, yeah, I mean, the thing is, 3 years in a row we've had record drug death increases. Drug deaths for the first time this year are higher than road deaths in the UK. Okay. This is urgent. This is an epidemic. This is a crisis, and we need to do something about it. Since drugs were banned in 1971, they've got stronger, more varied, and cheaper. When I started buying heroin in 1993, I was paying 10 quid for 0.2. When I stopped, 14 years later, I was paying 10 quid for 0.2, and that 0.2 was stronger than when I started.
Why?
I mean, because we have no impact on the drug supply. Policing doesn't bring that price down. It gets easier and easier for gangsters to sell it, And so they're in competition all. So the product gets stronger and stronger and stronger
because it's its own sub-market. It's not being regulated.
I mean, what price was a pint of milk in 1993 compared with 14 years later? It's complete. It's the only inflation boost beating product. It's going down in price, getting cheaper.
Yeah.
And now we've got fentanyl coming in, which is an adulterant in heroin, which has been devastating North America. And in the last few months, the last few weeks, we've had some deaths in the UK.
Okay.
For me personally, there's the elephant in the room that the government are ignoring, is that it doesn't matter what laws you bring in, it doesn't matter what you do, people want to get high, and that will never ever stop, because
Absolutely.
people have hard days at work, people have depression, people have experiences when they're young, people sometimes just want to chill out and have a good time. You will never ever stop that, so you will never ever want to ever stop people taking drugs. It's impossible to stop. Once you grasp that fact, we'll actually get somewhere, but until that happens, we're going to keep pissing into the fucking wind.
That's absolutely right, and well said. I mean, people do want to temporarily change their software.
Yeah, and it's no different to having a glass of wine, having a glass of wine after work, like many 40-year-old housewives do. Do you know what I mean? It's just a different version of that, and that is more acceptable. And I think, unfortunately, one of the main reasons, the main issues is cannabis, because it has so many uses, and there's so many companies that are terrified of that getting legalized, because if I'm part of the alcohol trade or the medication trade, I know that I'm going to take a massive whack if people can just grow a fucking plant and not get that money.
And then, so the argument about that would be, who are the people who have the biggest means of production? Who are the people who are very good at coordinating that sort of thing? It's the people who already do medicine and the people who already do alcohol. So you need to find a way of
making it in their interest,
of winning those people over.
Unfortunately, though, those people are not from the countries that it would serve if this was made legal.
Yeah, exactly.
So the people, I don't know, like, they're all the white collar lot, like the white collar criminals, like, in my opinion. Like, they're making a fucking...
You could argue there's a racket, but then we're getting into a really sort of politicized conversation.
So what I'm saying is, though, but ironically, it does come back to skin colour in a way, because it is going to be people with brown skin who fucking make the money off of that, and that's why they're fighting it. In my opinion, it's got nothing to do with what's right for the people. Oh, don't take cannabis because it's bad for you. It's all about money.
I think we're all agreed that there's not many people.
I'm not saying anything new under the sun there. Yeah. I'm just saying it because it needs to be said.
And the sun has never said it.
Definitely.
Like what is interesting from my side is, obviously, there's regulation. There's other industries where things are regulated. And I'm not trying to give you a hard time. I just want to make sure that people don't think we've just allowed you to come on and be like, legalize all drugs, and then let you go. What about, there are industries where things are regulated, alcohol, tobacco, those sort of things. Some people still want to avoid paying tax. They want to do it themselves. They want to go direct to the consumer. What would stop someone from still being a gangster, being underground, and doing it their own way?
Well, I mean, the most important thing about regulating drugs is to remove the black market. But you make a very good point that there is still a black market for example, alcohol. There are certain parts of the South Coast where it is estimated that 10% of alcohol that's sold is actually smuggled. So there's still organised crime involvement. But
my godfather was jailed for smuggling cigarettes, actually.
But another great reason for Brexit. I'm joking. But
that's only avoiding tax on 10% of the market.
Right.
The illicit drugs market is 100% of what, so you're talking a small, very tiny percentage that's reduced to the black market, and that's a massive improvement. That money is not enough money to buy yourself people to join the police.
And we're also sort of talking about, I read a book a few years ago when I was a kid, one of Ben Elton's books. It was called High Society. And it was about a minister who tries to legalise drugs, because there's something about one minister every year is allowed to suggest a law they can push through. Mm-hmm. And so he's talking about legalising all drugs. And it's basically the situation you're talking about. Is it practical? Is it something that could happen?
I think it's inevitable. I think that the war on drugs is beginning to die, because there are politicians, there are men, I mean, at Leap UK we speak to lots of politicians and lots of politicians' advisors, and there is great sympathy for the view, and right. People want an evidence-based policy. But this has to start at the public first. the politicians have to be confident that they can get voted in on this topic. So actually, more important than the politicians is the public. And if anyone listening or watching this is persuaded, then please, you've just become part of the social movement.
Unfortunately, I think that there's still, particularly people who are over the age of maybe 45 right now, who are still maybe brainwashed into what people were told so many years ago, that people like my granddad, for example, drug users are scum to him. Do you know what I mean? There's no education there for what it's all really about. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
I think it's going to take from people who are our age, when they are 50, 60 years old, when we're sort of controlling the old people vote, and that education's then had so much time to marinate that we might actually...
That's what I'm saying, it does take it's going to take generations.
Yeah, it's going to take 20 years, probably.
That's frustrating, because I'd actually quite like some cannabis. You know what I mean?
But unfortunately, you can't have any, because it's not legal.
The thing is, there are other countries and there are other places where it is becoming legal.
LA?
Yeah, LA.
Canada's the big one. That's the one that's going to have the most impact internationally. The whole country, yeah.
And Canada's the reason, isn't it?
But the reason that's going to have the biggest impact is because Justin Trudeau campaigned on it as a child protection issue, which it is.
Right.
And as soon as you start framing that to people, that this is about protecting our children, and once the evidence starts coming from Canada, then that's the big domino that's going to stop.
And
that's how we sell it to the people. Not literally sell it, but how we sell the idea.
Yeah, we've got to protect our children from drugs because they can get too easy access to them at the moment. And we need to protect them from the black market, which is corrupting them.
Right. How do you get rid of that black market, though? Because that black market is... you are also... angering, it's a bit like poking the beehive, do you know what I mean? And saying, maybe there wasn't.
Then you're saying they're not going to go down without a fight?
Yeah. There's not going to be many drug dealers out there that go, cool, I'll just put a shirt on and move into the industry.
I'll go and stack shelves at Asda.
Yeah.
Well...
Of cannabis. Ironic.
This is actually the biggest argument I have with police officers. The police officers' argument, or many police officers' argument, is that they're not just going to go away. They're going to do more gangster shit.
Like what?
But that's it. Like what exactly? But the thing is there's a real danger with that view, because that's the view that these people are bad and are always going to do something bad because they were born bad.
Which is again a generational thing.
Yeah.
But that's prejudice. You know, people are not born bad. They are. It's not criminals that cause crime, it's opportunity.
But what I'm saying to you is...
it all stems down to poverty in a way.
And that's what I'm saying. So my argument, or the idea that I'm putting forward, I don't necessarily agree with it, is that these people aren't bad, but you are taking away a huge revenue stream for them. And if someone's built their whole life around, I've got a BMW, I've got whatever... Yeah, well,
they're not going to suddenly rob a bank because that's too big a risk.
No, but that's what I'm saying to you. So how do you then deal with those people? Because that is quite tricky, isn't it? That's
a wider social issue. I mean, the fact that there are less opportunities for poorer people is something that's a wider political issue.
Do you know what I'm thinking about right now? And this is such a weird comparison, but in the YouTube community a while ago, there was a revenue stream of FIFA coins where people were sort of semi-illegally making money out of selling digital products on the internet, and that was taken away by a company, and people were literally making hundreds of thousands of pounds apparently off of this.
People making millions of pounds.
Yeah, apparently some people are making millions of pounds out of this sort of thing. And well done to them. And
you know who you are.
Unfortunately, I didn't get that. But anyway, I'm not bitter.
It's not that you didn't try.
But the thing is, once that was regulated, and that income was no longer there, people have to just make do. And what you said is, well, what are they going to do? And if those police officers haven't got a response where they can say, well, they'll just do this, what are they going to do? Once you take away that main supply of income, it's not like they can just create another issue.
No, exactly.
They can't create another drug because people have already got that. You've eliminated that now.
Well, I suppose, the argument would be, there is other stuff they can do. There's gambling and all sorts of things that they can do. But you're arguably taking away an issue which is a huge part.
Massive.
Of what they have. Yeah.
But all opportunities for crime are already being taken.
Yeah.
So you won't create more crime by regulating.
No, and that's not necessarily my argument.
Exactly. Good point.
Yeah, which is The problem is it does all seem a little bit too easy, doesn't it? Or it seems a little bit too simple. So there are going to be people out there who have the opposite argument to you and sort of say, no, we need more regulation of those.
Well, we've been
criminals.
trying pretty hard for several decades now. It's time to wake up and realise that this isn't working.
Wake up and smell the cannabis.
It's not just futile, it's worse than that. It's causing great harm.
And it has to be also, though, that it's down to the education of people, that then people vote in the right way. And
put pressure on their MPs as well.
Mm-hmm.
We have to have people actually contacting their MPs and saying this is an issue.
Mm-hmm.
Because it isn't as if, actually, what I find interesting, if you go to a music festival or something like that, you could probably arrest everyone there. But if you go to a music festival, the police, the police don't go with drug dogs for a very good reason. Do you know what I mean?
Because
the dog would go mental.
Well, then there'd be no music festivals anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
But that works as a perfectly good functioning village for about a week or two. Do you know what I mean? And the police seem to be able to walk around absolutely fine.
If anything, when everyone's high, is a very slim chance anyone's going to attack
much
you.
More pleasant, yeah. Yeah, it is much more pleasant.
No, I'm not advocating the
use of drugs.
Because people do get...
I was not advocating the use of drugs.
No, but you get attacked in the comments for advocating the use of them.
You also, yeah.
What we're saying is regulation.
Yeah. And that's what you're saying as well.
I'm saying we should save lives and reduce harm.
And one great point that you made is, if people out there, in a previous interview I seen, you said, if you don't care about, that side of things, of the care of people and wanting people to not be in such a bad way that they're at the end of a phone of a gangster all the time wanting the next fix, than care about the money, because it costs a lot more money to police these people and to jail these people than it does to care for them and nurse them back to health.
Sure, but if you are one of those people who cares about the money, I want to make it very clear, you're an arsehole.
Okay then.
Okay. But that's quite interesting as well, isn't it? That actually there's still going to be a big stigma around drugs, which will again take a generation or a few to get rid of. Arguably, you're also saying something here that it would create a massive revenue stream for the government, and you can tax it. And
absolutely. I mean, the amount of tax that's been brought in the United States and those states where it's legalised is absolutely enormous.
Apparently, suicide rates are going down in the states where marijuana has been legalised as well.
Yeah, and there is less opioid overdoses in those states as well, which is also very interesting, I think.
So there's a lot of statistics really to back it up.
The evidence is all on the side of reform. I'll debate anyone.
Yeah.
Anyone publicly.
Not Theresa May, she won't turn up.
No, she won't. because the evidence is on our side, and all we want is for policy to follow evidence. It's just not too much to ask of any politician, I don't think.
Were there any police officers who came to you after the book came out and were like, I'm not really happy you put that in, or disagreed with what you wrote, or anything like that?
Before the book came out, I was public enemy number one to the covert policing world because I was talking about it, I was campaigning about it. Since the book's come out, I've had enormous amounts of support. So many people have contacted me. In fact, we've got several new members at Leap UK who are ex-undercover cops who are saying, you're just saying things that were on my mind.
Brilliant.
It's fantastic.
Someone's asked if you had to do things such as have sex with people or take drugs while undercover.
Never had to have sex with anyone. I definitely would never have done that for ethical reasons. I did have to take drugs. I only smoked cannabis a few times. I had to take amphetamine once, which was I'd stupidly made myself out to be a connoisseur of amphetamine and got myself into a bit of a sticky situation and had to have it. Which was horrendous, to be honest.
How do you make yourself out to be, as you, in your own words, a connoisseur?
I was just, I like
That's a YouTube channel coming soon.
I just talked about it. I liked some really good speed. I liked my methamphetamine. I liked my Dexies, those kind of things.
And they sort of called your bluff.
Yeah, well, they did because he gave me a present, and it was normal.
Not a cup.
Normal speed is about 5% pure. This was 40% pure.
Jesus.
And I was up for 3 nights. It was horrendous. I was so anxious. Mind you, my house has never been so tidy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard that speed makes you very switched on.
It was horrible.
Were you ever worried that you'd do drugs with them and then you'd sort of drop your guard?
Well, I didn't take drugs very often, and it was really a last resort kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I mean, not the terms I really thought about. I mean, when I had the speed, I got out there as fast as I could.
Yeah.
I thought, I can't. This is. I just need to go.
Yeah.
Someone was asking, what is the worst thing you've had to do in order to keep your identity secret?
No, I don't know. I mean, lots of people are manipulated. There's no one particular thing that I had to do.
I appreciate that about you, though, that you seem sort of, sort of proud of what you did, but equally, when it was feeble and weak people, you sort of had a bit of guilt about that, because I think a lot of people wouldn't.
I'm not proud of what I did. I mean, I'm proud of the personal development I got out of it, and I'm pleased that some nasty people were put in prison, but overall, I'm not proud of the work at all.
Did you get much support?
I significantly caused more harm than good. Significantly.
And did you get much support from that from the police? So, for instance, have you received counselling on that since or anything like that, or is that not the kind of thing?
No, we received counselling once a year, and it was crap.
I can see by the smirk on his face that he's like, "Oh yeah, they really looked after me."
Yeah.
No, I mean, I had PTSD, and they didn't understand it at all. I had PTSD at the end. I was a bit of a mess. But people don't understand PTSD.
Do you feel? I mean, we could talk for a long time on this as well, but you hear about soldiers who have PTSD and servicemen and women. Do you feel like there's still a stigma about that?
Yeah, I think there is, but it's decreasing now. It's getting significantly less so. But there's still people don't understand it enough, and I think there should be more discussion about it to understand it.
Yeah, when you're putting yourself in our brains as humans aren't meant to go through the things that you've been through and other people have been through. So when you go through that, there needs to be like aftercare. Yeah,
but oddly enough, all the near-death experiences I had, and there was quite a few, it's not actually those that were dominating my mind when I was suffering from PTSD. Because you have I had intense, anxious memories where I was existing only in one memory, which is really horrendous when you're doing without sleep. But it wasn't the sword to my throat or anything. It was the people I'd manipulated. It was the cammies and the other people like that.
The guilt.
Yeah.
Fair play, mate.
Moral damage, I think, is the phrase.
Right.
Someone asked, what was the closest you ever came to blowing your cover, if ever?
Yeah, well, I had someone find the camera. It's a very long story, though. I had a gangster find the camera, but you probably have to read
really?
the book for that one, because we might how long have we got?
Found the camera.
So that's in the book, though, yeah?
Yeah, that's in the book, yeah.
That's certainly a story to read out of that, then.
But they found the camera.
They found the camera, and yeah, I almost got run over with a car. It was very touch and go surviving that one.
Fuck me, mate.
There's one reason to buy the book. Finding a camera, then always going to run over by a car.
A couple of questions at the end that are quite funny. Who would make a better detective, Lawrence or Brian?
Oh, well, I mean, you've got a great attention to detail, which would stand you in good stead, but you've got such an open sort of a likable, I mean, not saying you're not likable, but you've got that sort of instant connection with people would be an advantage at all. So how about hybrid? Maybe if you had babies. Maybe if you had babies.
It's actually ironic how often that comes up on the podcast.
I think the only reason I'd give the edge to Lawrence is because I feel...
conspicuous?
The fact that you're a lot less confrontational than me. So I think I'm very good up until you say confrontational, because if someone got in my face, I think I'd find it very hard to just brush it off, whereas I think you'd be good at that.
Yeah, but then I don't know, because that's the sort of thing, you can train yourself. If you know there's going to be a reward from not being confrontational back, whereas the difference in your real life is that if you're confrontational back, you tend to get a reward because look at you. Whereas
you've got to play the long game, I suppose, in this respect, haven't you?
Yeah. And I think you're much more manipulative than I am.
Thanks very much.
That's an advantage.
Yeah, it's a real,
I mean, if there was women on the case,
Oh, who do I have to shag around here to get some drugs?
Morally, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to get this case nailed down. Does he ever get so friendly with criminals that he sympathises with them? I know you've kind of already. Did you ever get in touch with any of them after you retired or anything like that? Or?
No, I haven't. Although one day I do hope to do that. But interesting, one particular person I got friendly with, a drug worker contacted me to let me know that particular person is alive and well, and that was amazing to hear. Actually, it was just so good to hear that this particular person in Leicester was alive and well. So,
wow.
One final question, buddy. How would you like to be remembered?
How would I like to be remembered?
It's a big question, but I like to ask people because I think it says a lot about people.
I suppose I'd like to be remembered as someone who brought the truth to people and helped contribute in a small way to the ending of the war on drugs.
Well, I hope you get what you're trying to get, me, because I think you're doing a really good job.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for coming on, Neil.
Thank you for inviting
Appreciate
me.
it, mate. Yeah, we'll leave the link to the book in the description below. I'm sure it'll be a cracking read. If you've enjoyed this...
Cracking.
Well, yeah, cracking.
Yeah.
If you've enjoyed this video, hit the like button, stay subscribed. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you later.